Hello everyone, welcome to A Sunny Book Nook. My name is Sunny and today I'm going to be talking to you about all the books that I read in 2023. Well, not all of them. I'm going to be doing my stats wrap up as I've done for the past 2 years. I don't know if these are the exact same types of statistics, but kinda generally the same, and we're just gonna go through it month by month after I give you my initial percentage breakdown of genre and then the format that I read it in and the star ratings that I gave out. But before I get into that, I do want to talk about how in 2024, what I'm gonna be doing, and one of the most fun, exciting, amazing things that I will be doing is doing a book club type situation, but specifically mainly running it through my Bindery. Bindery is essentially a Patreon like platform, but you can sign up for it as a free follower and member. And if you're a free follower and member, then you can get access to my Discord where I'm going to be running our book club situation, and we can together choose a book to read every month or bi-monthly, just depending on what you guys want. You'll also be able to get my free follower posts, which will essentially function as like a newsletter similar to Substack, in which I will be sending out a sort of roundup written book review situation, because one of my 2024 resolutions in terms of reading is to write a full-length book review of every book that I read, because usually on Goodreads I'll just like type a few sentences or a couple words even, that sometimes nothing at all, of like a review type situation of what I read with a star rating, obviously. But I'm thinking that in order to consolidate my thoughts more and get a more holistic breakdown and interrogation of any given text, I'm going to write these reviews. And I think that every time I finish a book and write a review, probably at the end of the week or maybe something like that, I'll figure out a posting schedule of sending out a newsletter of my book reviews from that week of the books that I read, my thoughts on them. That way you can kind of get more live updates of what I'm reading through that newsletter and get sort of my essays and thoughts on books that I'm reviewing, as well as other things. Like I'm working on an essay defending audiobooks right now, which will be relevant to the stats breakdown. I'm working on an essay comparing the Poor Things movie and book, because I read the book before watching the movie and it created some expectations that were both met and not, and I want to sort of talk about the textual dynamics of a book versus a film in what goes into that adaptation. And so yeah, that's all going to be on like my free newsletter follower tier. So I hope you sign up for that. Click the link down below and stuff. But for my paid members, like the $5 tier and then the $12 tier, I'm going to be posting bonus content, of course, bonus videos for you guys. And also for my $12 tier, I'm hoping to run a sort of book club Zoom seminar for every book club meeting, essentially, like a seminar style breakdown of the book, bring in some knowledge that we have of the author's background, specific passages you want to look over, or character analysis, or that type of thing, you know? My political thematic analyses of some books that I've reviewed on this channel, that sort of situation, but interactive within our Zoom room. So I think that would be really fun to do that, and that will be at the $12 tier for members, so we can all be like committed to engaging in the project of like reading and analyzing a book that month or bi-monthly. It's kind of similar to what Sunbeam's Jess does on her Patreon, and I wanted to do that on my Bindery, and yeah, because it sounds really fun. But the $5 tier, of course, will get access to exclusive like members only Discord channel, so then my server, where we can talk about the book club choice of that month. But anyone can join. I just think it'll be more like interactive if you're on my Bindery and are on the Discord through my Bindery. So yeah, that's a fun announcement for 2024. So sign up for that. Look out for book reviews hitting your inbox the way like Substack does, maybe every week or every other week or so, with my reviews of books that I read. And each book review is probably going to be around like 750 words or double that or more. Like they're going to be pretty lengthy, and I will mention up top whether I have spoilers if it's like a fiction book. I've been having fun writing my reviews so far, and I'm excited to keep going on with that project of reviewing every single book, not just for the camera for you guys, but also for you guys via my writing. So yeah, really excited for that, and really excited to do a book club where I can run it almost like it's like a fun English class. Like, that sounds so fun to me, and I hope you guys sign up. I hope you guys are excited to get some bonus content, because actually the bonus video that I have up right now for the $5 tier and above is my honorable mentions list, as well as a ranking in ordering of all the books that were my favorites of the year. Because in my favorites of the year book videos, part 1 and part 2, I didn't really mention any particular order of how much I liked a book more than the other, but in this bonus video on Bindery, I get into that and talk about like why I am ranking all, I think it's 16 of my favorites of last year in the order that I did, because I forced myself to do the ranking, because the reason why I didn't do a ranking was because that wasn't something I was inclined and felt like I should do or wanted to do. So yeah, but anyway, that's sort of the gist of what's happening for this upcoming year and what you can look forward to from this channel, and as I sort of help build a community there. Because the other really fun, exciting thing about Bindery is that once we've sort of built a community together on Bindery, I can be able to start an imprint essentially and help publish books and bring them into the world for us to read and for them to get on shelves and stuff. So it's more of a direct to reader sort of situation where you can get more behind the scenes looks at the publishing industry and the mechanisms of that through like me, which that is super exciting. I'm calling my Bindery page Sunny Thoughts because it's like, it's my thoughts, but they're also sunny thoughts because sunny like the weather, of course. But yeah, and it's just gonna be our bookish thoughts and our bookish chats on our Discord, and hopefully we can build our Bindery community so that I can continue moving forward with, this channel and putting out reviews in both video format and now a more full-length written format, because my short and snappy Goodreads reviews are fun. I just am really forcing myself to get into the disciplinary mode of like tapping out all of my full-length thoughts in an essay or a review type format of every book that I read this year, and hopefully I'll be able to keep it up, and people being followers on my Bindery will definitely help me stay accountable to that, hopefully. So anyways, to get into the breakdown of what I had read last year, I in total had read 137 books, and that fell short of my 150 book reading goal on Goodreads of last year for my reading challenge. But I honestly don't really care that much, because it was whatever, because the year before that I read like over 200 books, and that was pretty crazy. But this past year has just been a lot busier for me, as you can tell, because I didn't post on the channel for a bit. In the videos before that I was traveling a bunch, so I just didn't have as much time to read. I'm not sure what this upcoming year is going to look like, but I set my goal to be 100 books for this upcoming year, so I'm not going to fall short of my expectations, hopefully, and that way I can stay on top of my reading and stay on track in terms of trying to accomplish this what is feasible for me goal. So yeah, 137 total books. That is pretty fun for me. And what Goodreads is telling me is that I read 38,202 pages, but that's not true. I didn't physically read that many pages. The longest book that I read was Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. And then my shortest book that I read was Galatea by Madeline Miller, which is there's like a short story novella type situation of a retelling. That's what the Goodreads 2023 year review stats had told me, but these are now like my own numbers, because I also plugged in my info into Storygraph, because I can't use two platforms at once, but I plugged in my info there and they didn't give me Storygraph didn't give me the correct numbers. It told me that I had read like 117 books or something, and I'm like, that's just not true. So I couldn't just use that data. So I like went through and handed this, and it was a lot of work, as were these screen overlays that you're about to see for each month. But in total, I read 8 2-star books and and here's a pie chart graphic, hopefully. I read 8 2-star books, 2 2.5-star books, 33 3-star books, 4 3.5-star books, 63 4-star books, 7 4.5-star books, and 20 5-star books. So that's pretty great. Very top heavy in terms of like higher star ratings. So that's really fun and amazing. I think like it really has just shown that I've gotten a better grasp of an understanding of my own reading taste, and I'm really good at just not reading when I don't want to read, because the whole point of me reading is because I'm having fun, and if I'm not having fun, then I'm not going to continue with the book. I think that my 0.5 star rating numbers might be a bit off, just because, again, Goodreads doesn't let you track half-star ratings, so I was just trying to, remember what it was by looking through my reviews, but it was hard to go through each 137 books, each of them. So, yeah, but I think, because 46% of the books that I read were 4 stars, that is really, wow, half of the books that I read last year were 4-star reads, which is, books that I consider to be good and I enjoyed, and I found were literarily well done, I had a lot of value in them, but obviously that I wouldn't consider, 5-star material. But the fact that 15% of the books that I read last year were 5-star books is also kind of crazy, because also if 25-star reads and 7 4.5-star reads from last year, out of those 27 books, I still only ended up with 16 top favorites, and then maybe 5 honorable mention favorites, which you should join my Bindery $5 tier membership or $12 tier membership to see my honorable mention favorites. But of that, that's a chunk of that itself. So I think it kind of speaks to how after I read a book, sometimes I'll just be like, wow, that was a 4.5-star read, or wow, that was a 5-star read. But oftentimes I'll get the experience of reading a book and being like, this is, I think, a 4-star read, but then it'll stay in my mind and just marinate there for the next 3, 6, 12 months, and I'm like, no, that's a 5-star read. I'm a bit fickle with it, Yeah, I mean, the fact that, only 6% of the books that I read last year were less than 3 stars, yeah, sounds about right. I didn't have that many standout least favorites. If you haven't watched my worst books of the year yet, you can see that I'm not that passionate about any of these books. They were just kind of flops for me, hence them being 2 stars. I can't really foresee. I mean, maybe I'll just get hit with a really bad book. But that's the other thing. If I don't like a book, I'll just put it down, which is why with a lot of these 2 and 2.5 star reads, it was okay, I see what you're doing here. I guess I'll just finish it through and see it through. Maybe it'll get better, and then it doesn't. So in January, I read 15 books, and as we can see from the stats on here, do we see how beautiful this is? I worked very hard on it. And I was inspired by Books and Lala, of course, in terms of the way that she does her monthly layouts. But in January, this is what I read, if you remember from my wrap-ups. You can see my breakdown of the way that I read it. And then for February, I read 12 books, and these were the 12 books. And in January, I would say 5 of these books were what I would consider literary fiction realism, and then 2 of them were short story collections, 3 were nonfiction, 2 were magical realism, I would consider, and there's 1 thriller. I'm looking at my computer now, obviously, because it has my stats pulled up, but that was sort of the breakdown there. And I think January was a really good reading month, because as you can see, there were quite a few favorites of the year that I ended up happening to read in January, so that's cool. But in February, I read 12 books. February is obviously the shortest month of the year, and I still ended up reading 12 books, and I think there's kind of a trend of the number of books that I read. I read more books in January, and then fewer and fewer and fewer, and then a lot of books in August, and then fewer and fewer and fewer. So I think I had spikes of reading at the beginning of the year and in the middle of the year, a little past the middle, just because those are around the times where I'm probably the least busy with other things in my life, because I just have more downtime to just chill and read. Also in January, in terms of the books that I owned and then didn't own, this is me just trying to take a look at my physical TBR and what I tackled versus what I didn't tackle, because one of my goals was to get through more of my physical TBR, and I did acquire some new books. Well, yeah, probably at least 10 new books this past year, probably, if I'm not lying about that. This chart sort of shows the percentage of books that were borrowed, most likely from the library in terms of the Libby audiobook service, or with Everand, which is a subscription online ebook and audiobook service. So either that, or with Hoopla, another free library service, or a PDF online or something like that in terms of ebooks. So that is how I've been reading things and where I've gotten the books. Then in February, I read 12 books, and it was more spread out across genres. And I was kind of doing my Black History Month reading challenge that I've done for like quite a few years now, where I try to read as many Black authors during Black History Month. And so we can see that I did that. Apart from a handful of these books, these are mostly Black authors, but actually the ones that are blacked out right now are the books that are published underneath the St. Martin's Press imprint, which is actually that it's a marketing boycott. So basically influencers are being asked not to talk about these books on our channels and stuff like that. So I'm blacking out the books on my breakdown. Obviously I consider them in terms of my stats, but I'm not getting into the specific titles. So yeah, but if you want to know more about why there is a marketing boycott, click the link below. There's a card that sort of explains it, the demands, the petition, different graphics you can use, and you should also, hit up Wednesday Books and St. Martin's Press to be like, so why have you been silent in the past few months about the bullshit that has happened? Anyway, so as we can see, February, this is the books that I owned, 3 of them, and then books that I didn't own, which was most of them, and that's sort of a consistent trend here, okay? But in March, actually, I did end up reading a lot more books that I did physically own and got through my physical TBR. But I bought the book Separate and Dominate in New York when I was visiting, and so that was a recently acquired book that was in my collection. I read less than in February, even though March is a longer month. I read 11 books. In April, I read 2 of my favorite books of the year, as you can see, both books that I physically own. One of them being a book that I got last year, again, in New York, and then I read. And then these other books being audiobooks, primarily, but April was a pretty good reading month, even though it was not that many books. Every book that I read in April was very good. In May, I read quite a few graphic novels, which is why I think I ended up reading 13 books, because quite a few of them were just like sit down, read it in one go, essentially, because it's a graphic novel. And then I also read quite a few short story collection, speculative fiction situations, and also some FF romances. So that was my May, and I didn't own any of these books, as you can see. In June, I only read 7 books because I was traveling, and I didn't own any of these books as well. Again, probably because I was traveling, so it wasn't like I was bringing with me my own books and reading them. And I mostly read these on audio. Oh, actually, Peach Pit was sent to me because Molly Ewan, who I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, but she's my friend on Bookstagram. Oh my gosh, there's a bird right by the window. There's like a red-breasted, like, brown bird, and then another brown bird next to it on the branch. It's so cute. It's so fat. I love those fat little round birds. Like, oh my god, I want to hold one like this, and I want to like pet it and maybe squish it very gently. Oh my gosh. Anyway, got distracted by the bird. But yeah, so June I actually obviously had Exalted as a favorite book of the year, but I also rated Killing Me a 4.5 star book because I thought it was fun. Peach Pit was what was sent to me, and I got that early copy, and it's another short story collection about weird women in fiction, and it was really good. I really liked it. In July, I again read 7 books, and 2 of them were graphic novels again. So, like, because I was busy and traveling and shit was going down, I, again, was not reading that many books. None of these books ended up on my favorites of the year list, so a bit of a flop of a July reading. Although I did like these books. Like, I rated Anne of Green Gables 5 stars because it made me cry. And Out There was a 4-star read for me. Like, I really liked that one. That was a good short story collection in my opinion. That was like science fiction, speculative stuff. But then in August, we really hit our stride here because I read 21 books, and quite a few of these ended up on my favorite books of the year. Actually, I purchased Diket and Trust of the Emerald Sea after I read them because I love them so much. But those other books I had already physically owned. And then The Shock Doctrine, me and Roisin from Roisin's Reading did a live show on her channel. But yeah, I read so many good books in August. 3 of these books ended up on my favorite books of the year, and a lot of these were just really good books. But then there were quite a few At least 2, 3 kind of flops in here, I will say. That's true. So, I mean, I did get through a lot of books in August, and I think it was because after traveling and stuff, I was like, oh, I just want to read. And I just got through a ton, and I had a huge fantasy phase as well, as you can see. But after that, I got busy again, and it was September, and I read 13 books. But again, I read some really good books. I read some favorites of the year in September, and some solid nonfiction, and I owned prior quite a few of these books. Quite a bit of fantasy here, some weird women fiction, and a classic. And then on October, I read 10 books, and I tried to read some stuff that was on a theme for the month, for the season, with like It Came from the Closet and Human Sacrifices, The Dead Take the A Train, even like Death Valley. But generally speaking, not really. Like, I feel like I'm not as much of a seasonal reader as I kind of want to be, or maybe not even want to be, because I'm such a mood reader. I feel like this season doesn't affect the mood of what I want to read as much as like what book I just read is making me want to read another book that is very much like it, that type of situation, or a book that is very much unlike it. But I did read a romance in here, as you can see, and some short story collections, and some more favorites of the year present in October. So getting back in our stride. I actually also, I didn't specify here, but I did purchase Black Wave after I had listened to the audiobook and read it, and that obviously was a favorite of the year. And Black Wave was a huge favorite of the year. Like, it's what introduced me to my now fave author, Michelle T. So yeah, very successful October reading month. And that bled into November, in which I read 9 books and blew through 3 more Michelle T books, basically back to back, and read some good stuff. I can't believe half of these books were owned, or over half of these books were books that were already on my shelf. Granted, I probably purchased all of those books this year, but collecting things under your physical TBR and then immediately being able to be like, yeah, and now I've cleared that part of my physical TBR, that's satisfying in its own way, you know? So, 9 books in November, and then finally in December, I read 11 books, and I had some more, or at least one favorite of the year in here. Other honorable mentions potentially. You'll have to watch my Bindery exclusive video to know that. But I also read some solid nonfiction. I had my historical romance phase over here. And again, there's another book that I can't talk about, even though I actually really wish I could. So, fucking St. Martin's Press, respond to the people telling you to get your act together. Yeah, that was a Wednesday Books book, I think, the one that's blocked out. And I really liked it, but I wish I could talk about it, but I can't. Anyways, I read some nonfiction. I actually read some Simon Rich again, 2 of his books back to back. And yeah, so these were all of my different months. Also in December, I didn't read any of the books on my physical TBR shelf. So, okay. But that's kind of a overview and a brief like capsule flash of every month of my reading. That was fun. In terms of a more general breakdown of the type of stuff that I was reading and how I was reading it, based off of my stats and my analysis, 68% of the books that I read in total last year were books that I read via audio entirely. And again, sign up for my Bindery and stay out on the lookout for my forthcoming essay. Probably around 750 words. I'm gonna try to keep it around there, of my defensive audiobooks as like real reading. Anyways, audio 68% of my reading, so the large majority, which was also the majority of my reading for the past like 2 years as well. So this has been pretty consistent. I think like the stats being in the 60%, that like makes sense. That's how it's been. 7% of my reads were via ebook last year, so 10 books. Yeah, so I read 93 books solely via audio, 10 books solely via ebook, and then 21 books physically entirely, so 15% of my reading was just physical reading, and then 13 of the books were books that I listened to and read, usually not at the same time, but like I would sometimes bounce between them, or I would listen to it and then look through the physical book and make notations and stuff after, which is something that I do like to do. That took up about 10% of my reading. So those are the different forms of reading that I was doing in the past year, and I think this is probably going to be pretty consistent. My favorite way of consuming a book still is audio, unless it is something particular or specific, or if I'm revisiting a book. I think right now, especially now that I'm like older, when I was younger, I could just sit there and like devour a book in one sitting, but now like I kind of need to be able to wash the dishes while reading, you know? Like I kind of need to be able to run on the treadmill while reading, or I don't know, just do things, right? Like go to the grocery store or walk places while reading, and that helps me. Or even just laying down and playing phone games or whatever. That's fun to do while you're reading. And so, yeah, I think that's my favorite way to do it. Ebooks aren't my favorite, but I'll do it, especially for like graphic novels. I would say that was the majority of why I picked up an ebook, was because I couldn't find it anywhere else, or it was a graphic novel. But in terms of the genre breakdown, I actually had 19% of my books be nonfiction this past year, which is interesting. I feel like that hasn't been the percentage breakdown of that category of book, that genre of book, in the past couple years at all. Like I think this is pretty new for me in terms of this being such a like almost 1/5 of my reading. So I read 26 nonfiction books last year. And then in terms of literary fiction, I categorize contemporarily published like lit fic as obviously literary fiction, but I also categorize stuff that was published like 50 years ago or 70 years ago as well that I read as literary fiction, because it was contemporary to its time and it was literary fiction of its time. So I included that in these stats, and I read 33 lit fic books that didn't have any magic in them, so I would consider them like realism or realistic fiction. So that was 24% of my reading, around a fourth of my reading. And then literary fiction that had a magical realism element, that had some sort of speculative element to it, but is generally a literary fiction book, made up 6% of my reading. So that was around 8 books that I read this past year, which makes sense because I do enjoy that sort of thing every now and then, but I feel like it can be kind of hammy when sometimes, and I can usually tell within the first chapter or so of a book, so I'll just DNF it or do not finish it. The fact that DNF is a verb is funny, but yeah. And then in terms of a speculative short story collection, so I'm referring to anything that's like horror or weird or like just science fiction, fantasy type vibes, short story collections, or dystopian short story collections, kind of like Out There by Kate Folk and that type of thing. I read 15 of those books of that nature, which constituted 11% of my reading. And then in terms of like realistic short story collections, like short story collections that were just realistic fiction, I read 2 of those types of books, so that's like less than 1% of my reading, or around 1% of my reading. And then in terms of fantasy novels, I separated fantasy and science fiction this year because I think I sort of determined more of a distinct separation of those in what I was reading. I read 19 fantasy novels, so 14% of my reading. And then for science fiction, I read 5 books that I would categorize as sci-fi, so that's like 4% of my reading. And then for historical fiction, I read 4 historical fiction books, and that constituted 3% of my reading. For historical romance, I actually, there's a book that I half put in historical romance and half put in young adult romance, because that's one of my other categories. So it's like a 4.5 type situation. So I read 4.5 historical romances in terms of splitting a book into 2 genres, so that's like around 3% of my reading. And then I read 2 contemporary romances, so again like 1% of my reading. 2.5 young adult romances, so 2% of my reading. And then 8 mystery thrillers, which is around 6% of my reading. And I attributed anything with like a murder mystery element in a realistic fiction world to this category. And yeah, because I just don't read enough mysteries and thrillers to separate them two. And for graphic novels, I read 6 of them, so, or like comics, or mostly illustrated books, and that constituted 4% of my reading. And then I read 1 play, and that is obviously like less than 1% of my reading. So I also read 1 poetry collection, so that's another less than 1% of my reading. But that's sort of the general breakdown of what I was reading this past year. It's kind of spread out all over the place, but because it's concentrated in lit fic in the realism sense, and then speculative short stories and nonfiction, and fantasy, because I had a lot of luck there as well. I think those genres are going to sort of dominate what I'm going to be reading this upcoming year, because I'm going to gravitate towards things that I want to love to read, and end up again having a lot of 4-star and 5-star reads. But yeah, so that was my 2023 reading stats. I think I covered everything. Let me know what the most interesting reading stats of yours were in the comments. I would love to know. Like how many books you read, or the longest book you read, or your star rating breakdown. Like, did you have as many 4 or 5-star reads as me? I don't know. But let me know that in the comments, or leave me like a red heart if you're going to join my Bindery as a free follower or as a member. I would love to see your guys' faces there, and to chat with y'all on my Discord and do our book clubs. And yeah, I'm really excited. I think what I'm going to do also is, for my $12 tier, our sort of book club seminar situation, I will put the video recordings of that, if everyone in that tier is okay with that, on to my Bindery for the $5 tier members. And that way you can like play back the book club discussion. I think maybe that could be fun. But also let me know in the comments if there's anything you would like to see specifically. I have my welcome video up on my page, and you can go watch that as well, and I talk more about what I'm going to be doing there. And also I'm going to include here some clips of my honorable mentions and ranking my favorites video that is now up on my Bindery for members. So enjoy that. But I'm gonna go. Okay, thank you for watching. Bye. Not to compare women, not to compare books, but because these are books that I kind of ranked neck and neck, maybe it's not that deep. None of this would have happened if people just talked to each other, but also no one would have talked to each other, because that's not how a neighborhood works.